Before we get into this episode of WTH, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want extended BTS content or fashion conversation, join us on Patreon. You'll gain access to our brand building Patreon only series class, as well as access to our private Discord filled with individuals looking to build meaningful fashion brands, personal brands, or just talk fashion. You're all welcome. Thanks again. Now back to the episode. Around 2008, 2009-ish, a new movement of fashion swept street, powered by high-end design and a particular celebrity that introduced an entire generation to the prospect of luxury and technical designers. Today on WTH, we explore the origins of what was formerly known as Street Goth, the brands that fueled its rise, and the individuals that made it into one of the most influential movements in fashion for a generation. I'm your boy Reggie Casual, and this is The origins of Street Goth are complicated. Those in the know say it's a mix of several different aesthetics, of which include goth and punk, of course, but heavy nods also go to street and luxury. Officially, the style is described as a mix of streetwear and high-end fashion, and is defined by a dark, gothic-inspired aesthetic. So basically the entire aesthetic of Y3, but with lower-end street brands subbing in for some of the more expensive pieces that Yohji's Ode to Sport offers. But we'll get into Y3 a bit later. The origins of Street Goth also have an unofficial home in Harlem. As anyone from the area post-95 will tell you, many obscure street trends that eventually become mainstream often originate from the distinct New York neighborhood, which also happens to be the hometown of fashion pioneer A$AP Rocky. However, before we dive too deep into A$AP's influence, it's important to understand why the style became popular and why so many abandoned the heavy influence of urban hip-hop style for something that seemed to be the antithesis of hood machismo. It's no mystery that pre-millennium fashion was in a bit of a flux at the street level. There were basically two camps, the skate punk heavy tones of Thrasher, Stussy, Fresh Jive, and the relative newcomer in Supreme in '94, to the no-holds-barred urban and hip-hop inspired machinations of Sean John, Rockwear, Fubu, Karl Kani, and Maurice Malone, among others. There was very little crossover between these styles and brands at the mainstream level, at least a whole lot less than what we experience today. In that skate was skate and hip-hop was hip-hop. However, in 2000 and 2001, that changed. Unsurprisingly, music would be the catalyst to fuel a new movement of crossover that would ultimately coalesce the two schools of thought. In the year 2000, Linkin Park would release their debut studio album in Hybrid Theory and set the tone for what the crossover could mean on a musical level, while a little project by production team The Neptunes under the band NERD would fuel the other side with their debut album In Search Of. Both of these albums highlighted the crossover of punk, hip-hop, and even funk music that had previously been largely avoided for overt pop music. And while there were others like the group Outkast and Limp Bizkit that also strayed further from the norm at the time, the sound and the style was more influential than previously before. It wouldn't be long before crossovers would become commonplace in popular music, and the individuals that spearheaded it would become the avatars for an entire different wave of fashion and style. In a sense, these musical movements and influential individuals gave permission to an entire host of urban and suburban kids who enjoyed both the gritty tones of urban culture and the rebelliousness of punk to mature into one subculture, which ultimately gave rise to what we definitively call streetwear as a culture and a fashion movement. By 2005, Kanye West's Late Registration dropped, playing off the same crossover potential with heavier hip-hop undertones. But Kanye's love of fashion and experimentation was clear, and it fueled a generation of budding fashionistas to take what they wore far more seriously, and even drop the oversized baggy pants of hip-hop's past. This era of fashion foreshadowed the swag era, but the other side of that coin birthed street goth, the polar opposite of swag's opulent displays of color coordination like those seen on the rapper Fabulous. Street goth was far more concerned with silhouette, combining street with a higher tier of fashion. However, the style wouldn't become a general part of that period's zeitgeist until the emergence of a celebrity that was perhaps far more influential than previously thought. By the time A$AP Rocky dropped his single Purple Swag, he was being heralded as a new star. While his wordplay was commendable, it would be his sense of fashion and style bravery that caught the attention of his initial followers and fans. It was his unique approach to style as a hip-hop artist that turned heads. For if Kanye was the catalyst to bring to heights we now know today, it was A$AP Rocky that dug that hole a whole lot deeper by exploring the labels and styles that even Kanye was reluctant to touch at the time. For the first time, we got to see a rapper in labels like Yohji Yamamoto, Rick Owens, Raf Simons, and Givenchy, and mixing that with labels like Blackscale and Nike. It was an unheard of departure. Here was an individual who was wearing labels you'd more likely find talked about on the forums of style zeitgeist than worn by your favorite entertainers. But his influence alone changed the face of fashion. By 2012, A$AP Rocky's approach to fashion was cemented, a style that went from street goth to what we enjoy today, for better or for worse. Street labels would follow suit. Some of the earliest included Blackscale, Sir, and Triumvir, brands whose black laden pieces became a signature. However, the added cut and sew element put them at a higher tier than street brands of the past. Not long after, higher tiered labels sprang from the ashes with similar approaches, namely Hood by Air, the ill-fated Noir, Pyrex Vision, Off-White, and eventually Fear of God. Designers like Rick Owens, Raf Simons, Alexander Wang, Yohji Yamamoto, and Eddie Slimane became just as well known to the street as they had been by seasoned fashion critics. And brands like Yves Saint Laurent, Comme des Garçons, and Y3, which had a near 10-year start on the trend, became go-tos for the style. But for those who had already known of these labels and designers would seek refuge in obscure brands that were less touched and tainted by this new influx of fashion enthusiasts, which they rightly predicted would lead to hype and oversaturation. But it wouldn't be long before the new class caught wind of those labels, like Julius, Comme des Garçons Homme Plus, the work of Chris Van Ash, Junji, Sakai, mainline Yohji Yamamoto, Number 9 Undercover, and of course Takahiro Miyashita, the soloist. This unfortunately led to an increase in gatekeeping, the act of closing off information and access to new fans of said obscure brands because they would likely bring hype with them, which critics believed would dilute the purity of these labels. It was no wonder that most of these obscure labels were Japanese, relatively unscathed and harder to procure unless you were in the know. Till this day, the process of buying Japanese labels still eludes an entire swath of fashion enthusiasts due to this effect. However, street goth, for all intents and purposes, was the catalyst for this wave of high street mix that birthed many brands we know today, like OAMC, A Cold Wall, Heron Preston, Rude, and Palm Angels, to name a few. Celebs like Kanye West, of course, Jaden Smith, Rihanna, Kendrick Lamar, and plenty more had adopted the street goth style at one point and validated the statement made initially by kids in Harlem. And the legacy of street goth still lives on. It is a style that has largely been unaffected by trends. However, as more individuals from that era have aged, a higher sophistication has taken root. Here in Japan, labels like Nude Masahiko Maruyama, The Veridian, Almost Black, Devoa, Rip Van Winkle, Lad Musician, as well as legacy labels like Atto, Comme des Garçons, Undercover, Attachment, and Yohji Yamamoto. Fashion enthusiasts from that generation of street goth are becoming more inclined towards the archives of these designers and collections that they missed, while the younger generation coming in sped towards the newer brands like Vetements, Pyrex Vision, and the aforementioned Hood by Air, Off-White, Elites, and Fear of God. Street goth also has further popularized techwear. giving more credence to labels like Acronym in the West and an entire host in the East, where the list is far too long to state here. This led to even Nike finally pulling the trigger and adopting Off-White, Eros and Hue, and a Cold Wall as collaborators, pushing sportswear ever closer to lifestyle and high-end athleisure. The Street Goth era can likely be regarded as one of the most progressive movements in fashion, informing an entire generation about the prospect of technical design and intentional style. While unwanted results like the growth of gatekeeping and flex culture did occur, there's no denying that there's far more individuals that take fashion seriously than ever before, which has led to an influx of would-be fashion entrepreneurs, often with more street experience than technical experience. And that continues even today. But of course, your thoughts are always needed in discussions such as these. And all of the elements and history and influences can't be explored in one simple video. So I want you to add to it. I want you to discuss what are some brands, designers, and styles that were missed in this episode. Or if you're feeling creative, suggest another style, brand, or person you'd like to see on WTH. Or if you're trying to build a brand yourself and you want to learn the ins and outs of marketing and growth, join us on Patreon for our special series, Class, or our private Discord, and our monthly webinar. It's up to you. But most importantly, keep it locked right here for all of your info on international street fashion culture and business. From Tokyo, it's your boy, and keep it casual. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. And I'll see you guys in a minute.